Welcome to Bookish Mind, Season 2. Today we unlock Chapter 6 of Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, titled Imagination, the Workshop of the Mind. Hill tells us that imagination is where all riches are first created, because everything we see began as a thought powered by desire and belief. So the big question is, how does that happen? How do you go from, just a thought
Right, something completely intangible, almost like thin air.
to actual solid reality?
Mm.
Like money, success, the things people really aim for.
Exactly, and that's really the heart of this chapter, isn't it? It's the crucial bridge Hill describes between the inner world and the outer results.
Yeah, the workshop, as he calls it. That's what we're planning to explore in this deep dive. We want to really unpack how he sees this working.
It's a real turning point in his whole philosophy. I mean, up till now, we've been focused on desire, faith, autosuggestion, things very much about shaping your internal state.
Right, mindset stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But this chapter, this is where, the theory starts getting practical. Imagination isn't just a feeling. Hill lays it out as the actual functional place, the mechanism, where those internal things start to take real shape.
It's the link, the bridge, like you said, between just wishing for something and actually having it.
Couldn't have put it better. Desire might be the fuel, the energy.
And imagination is the engine. And maybe the tools, too.
Yes. That's a great way to think about it. Without that workshop space to actually fashion the plans, that energy of desire, well, it just sort of stays as energy, doesn't it? It doesn't become anything concrete.
So our goal here is to basically pull apart Hill's blueprint for this mental workshop, understand its parts, its different ways of working.
And look at the examples he gives. He uses some pretty big historical examples to show how people actually used this faculty to build massive success from, well, basically from ideas.
Yeah, we want to get to the how and the why it works, according to Hill, not just the what.
And hopefully leave you, the listener, with some practical thoughts on how you might fight up your own imagination workshop. Because maybe it's just been a bit quiet, waiting for you to switch the lights on.
Okay, let's dive right in then. Hill doesn't really beat around the bush, does he? He says imagination is literally the workshop where all plans are fashioned.
He's very direct. It's the place where that initial impulse, that raw desire, that thing you really, really want, starts to get its shape, its form.
And crucially, where it gets translated into a plan for acts again. He emphasizes that it happens through the aid of imagination.
It's not enough just to want it badly. You have to imagine the way forward. You have to visualize the steps, even if vaguely at first.
That framing, calling it a workshop, it really changes how you think about imagination, doesn't it? It's not just like passive daydreaming.
Absolutely. It becomes an active, almost industrial process in your mind. It's not just seeing pictures. It's the act of construction. Like you're taking that formless energy of your desire and you start building the structure of a plan around it.
Piece by piece.
Yeah, piece by imaginative piece. It's where the abstract idea begins its journey towards becoming something tangible.
He also says something interesting about the time he was writing the early 1900s. He called it the most favorable age for developing imagination. Why was that?
He pointed to the rapid change happening all around and the sheer amount of stimuli. New inventions, new ideas, the world was shifting fast.
Oh, yeah. If he thought that was rapid change, I wonder what he'd make of today.
Right, it's exponential now, but his core point holds, I think. An environment that's constantly changing, throwing new information, new challenges, new possibilities at you. It forces imaginative thinking.
Because you can't rely on the old ways.
Exactly. Stability and routine can maybe lead to complacency, mentally speaking, but disruption, new stimuli, they push the mind to find new connections, conceive new solutions, imagine different ways to operate.
So, by his logic, our current, sometimes chaotic world might actually be prime territory for developing imagination.
Potentially, yes. If we choose to engage with it that way, rather than being overwhelmed. The raw material, the stimuli, are certainly abundant.
And to back this up, he gives some really powerful examples of what imagination had already achieved in the 50 years before he even wrote the book. These weren't small things.
No, not at all. Big leaps. He mentions conquering the air, how man had, learned to fly better than the birds themselves.
Just think about that leap. The Wright brothers, for instance. Imagining powered flight, seeing past gravity, past all the skepticism. That takes serious imaginative power.
Immense. And then he talks about harnessing the ether, which sounds quaint now, but he meant radio, basically. Sending voices, information instantly across the globe using invisible waves.
Again, purely imagination first. Imagining those waves, the technology. Building theories about unseen forces and then making them work.
It's that blend of theoretical imagination and practical application. He gets even more specific, pointing out that science had analyzed and weighed the sun from millions of miles away.
And figured out what elements it's made of.
Right. And he explicitly says this was done through the aid of imagination. He puts the emphasis right there. It wasn't just the scientific method in isolation. It required imagining the tools, the math, the models needed to figure out the composition of something totally unreachable.
That phrase is key, isn't it? Through the aid of imagination. It shows it's not just for artists or writers. It's fundamental to scientific discovery, too.
Absolutely fundamental. He also touches on understanding the brain itself as a kind of broadcasting and a receiving station for the vibration of thought.
Which definitely sounds like foreshadowing later ideas in the book, right? About connecting minds, thought transference. A very imaginative way to think about how brains might interact.
It is. And then maybe more relatable for his readers then, he talks about the massive increase in travel speed. He paints this picture of having breakfast in New York and lunch in San Francisco.
Which would have sounded like pure science fiction back then. But it was imagination building on the early potential of trains and cars, visualizing a future speed that wasn't reality yet.
Precisely. So he uses all these examples, flight, radio, astronomy, brain science, speed, as evidence for his really big statement in this section.
Which is?
A man's only limitation, within reason, lies in his development and use of his imagination.
Wow. That's a heavy statement. He truly believed we were only just scratching the surface of what this faculty could do.
It's incredibly empowering on one hand, but also a huge challenge, isn't it? It basically says the main bottleneck isn't your circumstances, your background, the economy. It's internal.
It's how much you're actually cultivating and using this imaginative power inside you.
Right. If Hill's correct, the biggest walls aren't out there. They're related to the state of your own mental workshop in here. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? How much am I actively developing and using my imagination day to day?
Okay, so if this imagination is the crucial workshop, Hill then breaks it down. He says it works in two distinct ways, two forms.
Yes. He identifies the synthetic imagination and the creative imagination. They do different things, but they often work together.
Let's tackle synthetic imagination first. What's its job?
Okay, synthetic imagination. Think of it as the arranger, the combiner. Its function is to take old concepts, existing ideas, or plans you already know about, and arrange them into new combinations.
So it's like using building blocks you already have, but putting them together in a new way. A remix.
Exactly like a remix. Hill is very clear. This faculty creates nothing fundamentally new. It only works with the material it's given, your past experiences, your education, things you've observed.
So it's practical. It's about innovation using known elements.
Very much so. He says the inventor typically relies heavily on this, constantly rearranging known principles and technologies. That is, unless they hit a wall, a problem that just can't be solved by recombining the known stuff.
Uh-huh. And that's where the second type comes in, creative imagination.
That's the idea. Creative imagination sounds, well, a bit more mysterious in his description.
How does he describe it?
He calls it the faculty through which the finite mind of man has direct communication with infinite intelligence.
Infinite intelligence. Okay, that's a big concept. What does Hill seem to mean by that?
Well, within his philosophy, it appears to be a kind of universal reservoir of knowledge, insight, maybe fundamental truth. It's a source beyond our normal conscious thinking where totally new, basic ideas come from.
So this is where the real breakthroughs happen. The flashes of inspiration, the hunches he talks about.
That's exactly it. Those moments where an idea just seems to pop into your head fully formed, and it doesn't feel like you logically derived it from rearranging what you already knew.
So if synthetic is like putting together puzzle pieces you have, creative is like being handed a completely new piece from somewhere else.
That's a really good way to put it. And Hill adds another layer. He says creative imagination is also the faculty that allows you to receive thought vibrations from the minds of others.
Okay, now we're really getting into it. Thought vibrations, tuning into other people's subconscious.
Yeah, it connects back to his idea of the brain as a transmitter and receiver. It suggests a kind of intuitive connection, maybe picking up on unspoken ideas, collective insights, or even having the same novel idea around the same time as someone else. He uses the language of vibrations, which was, fitting for the scientific understanding of his time.
It's definitely a more expansive view of creativity than just personal eureka moments. So how do you actually activate this creative imagination? How do you tap into infinite intelligence or receive these thought vibrations. He says it works automatically, but there's a catch.
A very important catch, and it loops back to earlier principles in the book.
Hmm.
Creative imagination kicks in, he says, only when the conscious mind is vibrating at an exceedingly rapid rate.
Vibrating rapidly. What does that mean in practical terms? High energy, intense focus.
Exactly. It means your mind needs to be highly stimulated, operating at peak intensity. And what's the most powerful stimulant he identifies for this?
Let me guess. Desire.
Bingo. The emotion of a strong desire.
So the intensity of your want isn't just motivation. It's like tuning the radio. It cranks up the frequency of your mind, making it receptive to these signals from the creative source.
That's precisely the connection he makes. That state of being intensely focused, totally absorbed, almost obsessed with what you desire or the problem you're solving, that heightened state opens the channel, so to speak. You become receptive to insights you just wouldn't get when you're calm and unfocused.
Okay, that makes sense. And then he says something really important about developing both kinds of imagination.
Yes, this is key. He states clearly that both synthetic and creative imagination become more alert and more receptive through USE.
Like working out a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly, his analogy. He
Yeah.
says imagination doesn't just die off if you don't use it. It becomes quiescent. It goes dormant, inactive. But the really encouraging part is that it can be revived and made alert through USE.
So even if you feel your imagination isn't very strong right now, you can exercise it back into shape.
That's the promise. You literally practice imagining, practice combining ideas, practice seeking inspiration, and the faculty itself gets stronger and more responsive.
So where does he suggest starting this workout routine?
His advice is practical. Focus your initial efforts on developing the synthetic imagination first.
Why that one first?
Because, he argues, that's the one you'll use most frequently in the actual process of turning desire into money. Most of the time, you'll be working with existing knowledge, resources, and plans, trying to combine them effectively.
Okay, so get good at working with the known ingredients first. Build that foundation.
Right. Master the art of the remix, the recombination. But always be aware that if you hit a serious block, that intense focus fueled by your burning desire might be the very thing that triggers the creative imagination to deliver that breakthrough, that brand new piece you need.
It's like you work the synthetic angle as hard as you can, and that very effort might prime the pump for the creative insight.
That seems to be the process he implies. Build with the familiar bricks, and the intensity of your building might just help you discover or receive the revolutionary new material when you need it most.
All right, let's bring this back to the main goal. Hill keeps hammering home, turning that intangible desire into tangible money. He's crystal clear that this absolutely requires a plan or plans.
No shortcuts there. You can't just wish it into existence. You need a strategy, a blueprint.
And where are these plans formed?
Right back in that imagination workshop. Primarily using the synthetic faculty at first, as we said, arranging your knowledge, your observations, your resources into a coherent approach.
And then comes what feels like a really critical, almost physical step he insists on.
Ah, yes. Reducing the statement of your desire and your plan for achieving it to writing. He doesn't just recommend this. He frames it as absolutely essential.
He even asks the reader to read a specific sentence about this aloud. Let's try that, really emphasizing it like he suggests. The moment you reduce the statement of your desire and a plan for its realization to writing, you have actually taken the first of a series of steps, which will enable you to convert the thought into its physical counterpart.
Hearing it like that, it gives it real weight, doesn't it? It stops being just making notes and becomes a deliberate act of creation.
Yeah, it's like that's the precise moment, the purely internal energy of desire first takes on a concrete external form. It exists outside your head.
And Hill connects this directly to how he sees nature working. He argues that everything tangible, the earth, our bodies, down to every atom, all started as an intangible form of energy.
So the whole universe is basically energy taking physical form.
That's his perspective, drawing on the science of his day. Energy coalesced into matter through natural laws, and your desire. He calls it a thought impulse, which he categorizes as a form of energy.
Okay, so if desire is energy,
Then, when you set out to achieve a goal like accumulating money, starting with that desire, you are essentially working with the same stuff nature used to create everything. You're using thought energy generated in the brain, which is itself part of the material universe created from energy.
so taking the energy of desire and giving it structure through a written plan, it's like mimicking the universal creative process, aligning with natural law to manifest a physical result, like money.
That's exactly the parallel he draws. You're adapting yourself to nature's methods, deliberately applying its laws to convert energy, your thought impulse, into its material equivalent, money or whatever your goal is.
And he doesn't see this as some mystical miracle, does he?
No, he finds it no more miraculous, fundamentally, than seeing a tiny seed grow into a huge tree or a single fertilized cell develop into a complex human being. These are natural transformations of potential energy into physical form. Converting desire is just another application of these same universal principles.
And he's incredibly encouraging about it.
Oh, yeah. He practically shouts from the page, "You can do it. It has been done before." He really wants to hammer home that huge success isn't about luck or random chance. It comes from understanding and applying these definite, immutable laws and principles.
It's about deliberate, focused action based on these laws.
Right. And he argues that the secret isn't really secret at all. Nature openly advertises these principles everywhere in the stars, the earth, biology. The transformation from intangible to tangible is happening all around us, constantly. Getting rich by applying these principles is just one more example.
But he does acknowledge this might not all click immediately.
Yes, he's realistic about that. He knows these ideas, especially connecting thought energy to tangible results, can feel pretty abstract or even far-fetched on a first encounter.
So what's his advice?
Reread. Reread the book, or at least this philosophy, multiple times. He specifically says to read it at least 3 times, suggesting that unless you've spent years studying how the mind works, you won't fully get it right away.
Why the repetition?
Because he believes with each reading, the understanding deepens. Things become clearer. Connections form. And eventually the principles stop feeling like just abstract ideas and become compelling. They start to resonate as fundamental truths you can actually use.
It's about really assimilating it, not just reading it, letting it sink in and change how you think and operate.
Exactly. Mastery requires that deeper engagement.
Okay, so we have imagination as the workshop, the 2 types, the need for written plans fueled by desire, and the connection to natural law. Now let's get into the concrete examples Hill uses to show this in action. Fortunes build purely on ideas.
Right. This is where the theory hits the pavement. Hill states it plainly. Ideas are the beginning points of all fortunes. Ideas are products of the imagination. And his first big story is The Enchanted Kettle.
Which turns out to be the origin story of Coca-Cola, right?
That's the one. It starts almost like a folktale. An old country doctor sells his secret syrup formula, an old kettle, and a paddle to a young, ambitious drug clerk named Asa Candler for $500, which was apparently Candler's entire life savings.
Sounds like a simple purchase of a recipe and some equipment.
But Hill immediately says, no, that's not what was really bought and sold. The crucial thing Candler acquired was an idea. The kettle, the paddle, the syrup itself, those were secondary.
So what was the magic ingredient Candler added?
Imagination. That's the mysterious ingredient Hill identifies.
Okay, let's break that down. What specific idea did Candler have beyond just sell this syrup? And how did his imagination transform that $500 purchase into, well, Coca-Cola?
The core idea presumably was much bigger than just selling syrup locally. It was the vision of turning this pleasant-tasting formula into a mass-market, universally available beverage. The imagination came in figuring out how.
Using synthetic imagination mostly, based on what we discussed.
Probably. He would have used his synthetic imagination to combine existing business practices in new ways. Figuring out bottling, large-scale distribution networks, maybe franchising models, creating instantly recognizable branding, national advertising campaigns. It was about imagining the infrastructure and the marketing needed to take it from a local curiosity to a global phenomenon.
And maybe creative imagination kicked in too, for the branding, the feel of it.
Quite possibly. Those moments of insight into what would capture the public's desire, how to position it not just as a drink, but as an experience, the pause that refreshes, that could well have involved creative sparks.
Hill details the absolutely massive impact this single idea, fueled by imagination, had. It's not just about Candler getting rich.
No, the ripple effect was enormous, according to the text. It generated great wealth for countless distributors and bottlers. It became a huge consumer of sugar, creating thousands of jobs in farming and refining.
Millions of glass bottles supporting that industry.
Right. Employing armies of clerks, stenographers, copywriters, advertising experts, artists who created the iconic imagery. It fundamentally transformed Atlanta into a major business center.
And its influence spread globally, a continuous stream of wealth, plus funding Emory University.
Yes, showing lasting impact beyond pure commerce. And Hill makes a point of its resilience. It kept providing jobs and paying dividends even during the depths of the Great Depression. That speaks to the power and solidity of the enterprise built on that initial idea.
Hill even weaves in his own personal connections, meeting his wife near where Coke started, drinking it when proposing, finding it stimulating for his writing. It makes this huge global story feel more human, more relatable.
It does. It underscores that these principles aren't just abstract. They manifest in tangible ways that affect real lives, including his own. The core takeaway is stark. The vast Coca-Cola empire grew from one simple idea activated and scaled by imagination using the principles Hill outlines.
And he insists that any sound, worthwhile idea has the potential for similar success if approached with the same principles.
Which leads him back to that powerful statement.
Truly, thoughts are things, and their scope of operation is the world itself. Seeing the Coca-Cola example really drives that home. A thought, an idea, literally reshaped commerce and culture worldwide.
It gives real substance to the notion that thoughts aren't just ephemeral wisps. They can have immense physical power and reach.
Okay, the second major story he uses is about Dr. Frank W. Gonzalez. The title alone is intriguing. What I would do if I had $1 million.
This one is a fantastic illustration of the difference between just having a desire and making a definite decision with a definite plan.
So what was Gonzalez's story?
He was a young preacher who was passionate about education. He saw flaws in the system and had this burning desire to start a new kind of college, one focused on practical application learned by doing. But he needed $1 million, a huge sum back then, to make it happen.
And he thought about it constantly.
For almost 2 years, Hill says. It was a consuming obsession. He had the desire, he had the idea for the college. But he wasn't making any progress towards the money. He was stuck in the wishing phase.
What changed? What was the turning point?
He had a realization sitting in his room, feeling stuck. He understood intellectually that definiteness of purpose was the starting point, and that it needed the power of a burning desire to translate into reality. But he hadn't actually made the definite decision or formed a concrete plan of action to get the money.
So he shifted from just desiring the outcome to deciding on the process.
Exactly. And the critical step was making a definite decision with a definite timeline. He decided right then and there that he would get the $1 million within 1 week.
Adding that specific time frame, that was the key.
It seems so. Hill describes Gonzalez experiencing this strange feeling of assurance immediately after making that decision, almost like an inner voice telling him the money had been waiting all along, delayed only by his indecision. It speaks volumes about the psychological power of committing fully with a deadline.
And things moved fast after that decision.
Incredibly fast. His definite plan was simple but immediate. Announce a sermon for the very next Sunday titled, "What I Would Do If I Had $1 Million." He'd been mentally preparing the content of that sermon for 2 years, pouring his passion and vision into it.
So the substance was there, just waiting for the definite plan to activate it.
Precisely. He went to sleep that night feeling confident, visualizing already having the money. Then, during the sermon, he apparently forgot his notes.
Which turned out to be a good thing.
A blessing, Hill calls it, because his subconscious mind, fully primed by the definite decision, the burning desire, and those 2 years of intense thought, took over. He spoke directly from the heart, passionately outlining his dream and his detailed plan for the college.
Yeah, the result.
Immediate and dramatic. Philip D. Armour, the famous industrialist, was in the congregation. He was so moved by Gonzalez's vision and certainty that he approached him right after the sermon. The very next morning, Armour gave him the $1 million.
Wow. $1 million. Manifested within 36 hours of making that definite decision and forming a definite plan, after nearly 2 years of just thinking about it.
It's an almost unbelievable story, but it powerfully illustrates Hill's point. The energy was there, the idea was there, but it took the catalyst of definite decision and a definite plan, even a simple one like giving the sermon, to make it tangible and quickly.
And Hill has a quote about this, about knowing what you want.
Yes, he observes, God seems to throw himself on the side of the man who knows exactly what he wants if he's determined to get just that. Again, less about divine whim, perhaps, and more about universal laws responding to that level of clarity, focus, and unwavering determination. And Hill insists this principle is still just as available and workable today.
So Pulling these two stories together, Coca-Cola and Gonzalez, the common thread is.
They both understood, perhaps intuitively at first, the profound truth Hill is teaching. Ideas can be transmuted into cash, but only when backed by the power of definite purpose, fueled by burning desire, and activated by definite plans conceived in the imagination.
It wasn't just the idea itself. It was the whole package. Desire, imagination, definite plan, and decisive action.
Exactly.
Now, Hill directly challenges a very common belief, one that's still around today. The idea that just working hard and being honest is enough to get rich.
He pulls no punches on this one. He says, quite bluntly, perish the thought, it is not true.
That's pretty direct. Is he saying hard work and honesty don't matter?
No, I don't think that's the implication. He's not dismissing their value, but he's stating emphatically that riches in huge quantities are never the result of hard work alone. Why?
Because
Generating significant wealth, in his view, comes from leveraging ideas, applying definite principles, and organizing effort intelligently through plans, all products of imagination, not just from physical toil or basic virtue. Remember, an idea is that impulse of thought that impels action through imagination. It multiplies effort.
you use a salesman as an example, right?
Yes, distinguishing between master salesmen and ordinary ones. The master salesman understands they need to sell the idea, the vision, the solution, which requires imagination, whereas the ordinary salesman might just focus on the features of the merchandise itself.
And the story about the book publisher really hammers this home.
It's a perfect illustration. Same book, same content, same printing effort. The only change was the title, A Change in the Idea Presented, and sales skyrocketed. It shows the incredible leverage an idea can provide, completely disproportionate to the physical labor involved.
The idea itself had immense value.
And Hill points out that ideas often have no standard price. Their value is determined by the creator, or perhaps by the person who recognizes their potential and knows how to implement them.
Like the early movie moguls he mentions.
Exactly. He notes that many millionaires in the early film industry weren't necessarily the original writers or creators, but they possessed the crucial imaginative skill of recognizing a valuable idea when they saw it and knowing how to turn it into a successful movie. Seeing potential is itself an act of imagination.
Okay, so recognizing ideas is key. Then Hill looks ahead, from his vantage point in the 1930s, and makes a prediction about the next big wave of opportunity.
He points directly at the radio business. It was still relatively new, exciting, but in his assessment, it was crying out for people with keen imagination.
What specific gaps or opportunities did he see in radio that needed imagination?
Several things. First, he saw a need for better content. Fortunes would be made, he predicted, by those who could imagine and create new, more meritorious programs, stuff that actually offered value, not just noise filling the airwaves.
So quality programming. What else?
He predicted a shift in advertising. Sponsors would get smarter and demand more than just glib selling talks. They'd want proof that the radio programs were actually turning listeners into buyers.
Performance-based advertising, essentially, even back then.
That's what it sounds like. It required the imagination to think about structuring radio shows not just to entertain, but to cultivate a specific buyer audience and demonstrate a return on investment for the sponsor. That's a sophisticated marketing concept.
And he also mentioned a specific skill gap related to the medium itself.
Yes, the need for a new type of advertising expert. Print ad people were trained to think visually how an idea looks on a page. Radio needed people who could take a written script and imagine how it would sound.
How to interpret it vocally, with timing, maybe sound effects, music.
Yeah.
To create the desired impact purely through audio.
Exactly. It's a different imaginative muscle. Hill even shares his own struggle and expense in learning this new skill, emphasizing that adapting your imaginative approach to new technologies is vital.
That's a great point. New tech demands new ways of imagining.
And he compared radio's potential then to the early days of silent movies, suggesting it was wide open with plenty of room for anyone bringing fresh imaginative ideas.
Which should be encouraging for people looking at new fields today, right? Even if you don't have direct experience.
That's precisely the message. He brings up Andrew Carnegie again. Carnegie admitted knowing little about making steel technically. His genius was imaginative and organizational, surrounding himself with experts who did know steel and applying principles to harness their ideas and efforts.
So great success often comes from that synergy, the idea person and the implementer working together.
Hill strongly suggests so. That combination of creative ideation and practical, organized execution, often involving collaboration, is where massive fortunes frequently begin.
Okay, what about luck? People often talk about waiting for a favorable break. What's Hill's take on that?
He acknowledges breaks happen, but advises strongly against depending on luck. It's not the safest plan, he says dryly. A break might provide an opportunity, but...
But it takes more than luck to turn it into something real and lasting.
Exactly. He uses his own life story here. His biggest favorable break was meeting Andrew Carnegie. That meeting planted the idea in his mind to organize the principles of achievement.
But that was just a spark, right?
Just the spark. It then required, as he repeatedly emphasizes, 25 years of relentless, determined effort to turn that spark, that opportunity, into the actual philosophy of success and the book itself.
25 years. What kept him going through all that time? Disappointments, setbacks, people probably telling him he was wasting his life.
It wasn't just ordinary desire, he says. It was a burning desire, an obsession. That white-hot intensity was the fuel that allowed him to push through temporary defeat, criticism, doubts, everything.
That sounds like the kind of desire needed to power the creative imagination we talked about earlier.
It absolutely connects, and he describes this fascinating evolution of an idea when it's fueled like that. At first, you are nurturing the idea, guiding it, giving it life.
But
then, if it's a powerful, worthy idea, and you stick with it with that obsessive desire, it reaches a point where it seems to gain its own power, its own momentum. It becomes a giant, as he puts it. And then the dynamic flips. The idea starts to drive you. It sweeps aside obstacles, pulls you forward almost irresistibly.
the idea takes on a life of its own. That's a powerful image.
It really is. It speaks to the incredible, almost autonomous power inherent in ideas themselves. Hill argues they are forces, potentially more powerful than the physical brains that give birth to them.
And they can live on, right? Long after the person is gone.
Definitely. They can persist, grow, and continue to influence the world. And his ultimate example of this enduring, living power of an idea is Christianity.
Which started, he says, with a simple core idea from Christ.
The idea of the golden rule, essentially do unto others, and the broader message of love, compassion, faith. Christ, the individual, is gone. But the idea, Hill writes, goes marching on, still developing, still shaping lives and societies 2,000 years later, constantly working towards fulfilling Christ's deepest desire for humanity.
It's a profound example of how a single, powerful idea born from desire and imagination can become an immortal force.
A truly world-changing force.
And then, right at the end of the chapter, he hits us with those very stark final thoughts.
Yes. Success requires no explanations, and failure permits no alibis.
Kind of circles back to personal responsibility, doesn't it?
Completely. Success speaks for itself. Failure ultimately rests on your shoulders. You can't blame external factors if you haven't applied the principles, including developing and using your imagination. It puts the ownership squarely back on the individual.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up. Let's synthesize the key takeaways from this whole deep dive into Chapter 6, Imagination.
All right. First, imagination isn't just daydreaming. It's the essential mental workshop where intangible desires are shaped into concrete plans.
It operates in two modes. Synthetic, which combines existing ideas in new ways.
And creative, which taps into new insights and inspirations, often fueled by intense desire. And crucially, both modes get stronger the more you actively use them.
We learned that ideas, born in this workshop, are the actual starting points of all significant fortunes, more important than just hard work or waiting for luck.
And that the process of turning desire into reality requires definite plans, conceived using imagination. And that the physical act of writing down your desire and plan is the critical first step in making the intangible tangible.
It's like aligning with nature's own creative process of energy becoming matter.
Exactly. And bringing these ideas to life demands that burning desire we talked about, coupled with definite purpose and unwavering persistence, like we saw with Asa Candler and Dr. Gonzalez.
Finally, ideas themselves are presented as powerful, living forces that can drive individuals and shape the world long after they originate.
Yeah, the potential locked within this faculty, when consciously developed and applied, is presented as immense.
It really reframes imagination as a core engine for achievement, not just some fluffy creative extra.
Which brings us right back to that core assertion about limitation. If the main boundary isn't outside you, but inside,
Related to how well you develop and use your imagination.
then the potential for change, for achievement, really resides within your grasp.
So that leaves us with a final thought, a question perhaps, for you the listener, to carry away from this.
Building directly on Hill's points, If your only real limitation within reason truly lies in the development and use of your imagination, what's one specific actionable step you could take, maybe even starting today, to deliberately engage and strengthen that vital workshop faculty? Will you commit to exercising it regularly like you would a physical muscle?
And perhaps more pointedly, what intangible desire or persistent idea, one that maybe you've kept tucked away, are you now ready to give concrete form? Are you willing to take that first crucial step? Hill emphasizes to define it clearly, outline a definite plan for its realization, and commit both your desire and your plan to writing, starting its journey into tangible reality.
Something to really ponder. The answers and maybe the beginnings of significant change might just be waiting for you to activate your own imagination workshop. Maybe revisit this chapter, let these ideas really sink in.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the power of imagination.